Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of MMT Mondays. Tonight, I'm going to challenge you. I want you to think about the time that you were able to answer a really complicated math problem. For me, that ended once you had to add more than an x and a y to the equation. But how about this? Think about the first time that the light bulb truly went off for you, and how it truly clicked that taxes don't fund spending. It was like, ding! It's an awesome feeling, wasn't it? So keep this in mind while we debunk the myths regarding the role of taxation within MMT. Many detractors of MMT claim that there is no use for taxing, which is just simply wrong. Rather, taxation's primary purpose is to cancel out inflation and keep our economy in balance. But that is severely undercutting the transformative role that it can play, which we're going to see in our first video. Richard Murphy does an amazing job in a matter of 4 minutes of breaking down the role of taxation within MMT. What we must understand is that the government doesn't really fund expenditures with taxes, but rather it pays for expenditures by creating new money. Once we're able to liberate our minds from the tether of taxes fund spending, then taxing takes on a role as an agent of change within the economy. It can be used to redistribute income and wealth. Wait a second, redistribution of wealth? That sounds like commie talk. Calm down, and don't worry, because we're not going to talk about the S word. Today, at least. Murphy is actually talking about progressive taxation that doesn't exist to explore the amount of money it can raise, rather with regard to the social consequence of addressing inequalities. Taxes can play a role in reducing our consumption as we move towards a sustainable economy. We can use taxes to stimulate things in the economy we want and suppress others that do harm. Overall, taxing becomes a social policy instead of a financial policy.
Hello, I'm Richard Murphy, and I want to talk about an aspect of modern monetary theory that is, I think, relatively little understood, and that is the role of tax in MMT. It isn't understood because what a lot of people think modern monetary theory says is that a government can produce money at will and spend it without limit. Now, that of course is not true. Well, it's not true that a government can spend without limit. A government can produce money at will whenever it wishes by simply telling its central bank to do so. But there is a limit on spending, and that is full employment. When there's nothing left to buy, creating more money produces inflation. And tax has a fundamental role to play inside modern monetary theory by cancelling inflation. That is its primary purpose inside the whole of MMT, because unless the money that the government creates is cancelled by tax, we will of course get rampant inflation, and nobody wants that. And everyone inside modern monetary theory realises that this is absolutely essential to keep the economy in balance. So the fundamental claim made that modern monetary theory has no use for tax is simply wrong. But there's something much more important about modern monetary theory and tax. Once we understand, as modern monetary theory says, that the government doesn't fund its expenditure with tax, because instead it pays for its expenditure by creating new money, then tax takes on an essentially different role within the economy. First, as I've just explained, it exists to cancel inflation. That's its first and most important task in MMT. But when we've liberated tax from the role of raising funds to finance activity, it takes on the role of being an agent for change within the economy. So it's used to redistribute income and wealth. So progressive taxation suddenly becomes much easier to think about, because we're not exploring progressive taxation with regard to the amount of money it can raise, but with regard to the social consequence of addressing inequality. We can use tax to reprice those things that the market creates, which do, however, result in harms: alcohol, tobacco, and of greatest importance now, carbon. We can think about how tax can play a role in reducing our carbon consumption as we move towards a sustainable economy. We can use the tax system to stimulate activities that we want and to suppress others we don't want by offering tax incentives and allowances to activities like, for example, new house building on a sustainable basis or the incentive provided to insulate properties. And at the same time, look at using tax to begin to harm or reduce those things that we don't want to happen, like, for example, burning of fossil fuels. Now, tax is then this fundamental social policy instrument rather than a financial policy instrument. And MMT lets us think about tax in a wholly new way. It becomes an ethical instrument for change. It lets us state our priorities as a society and gives us a tool to deliver them. Now, that makes the whole of tax debate something unlike anything we've really ever had, because we've presumed that overarching everything is, does it raise money to fund government expenditure? But now that's not a question we need to prioritise. We can instead ask the question of, what society do we want? How are we going to create it? And what tax role can tax play in delivering that? And to me, that's really exciting. This is one of a number of videos around modern monetary theory and tax policy that are going to be created. If you're interested in more, please click the subscribe button below this video. Follow me on Twitter at Richard J. Murphy. Look at my blog, Tax Research UK, and I'll be talking about this issue again soon. Thanks for watching.
In our next video, we see an interview from earlier this week where Real Progressives own Steve Grumbine went on Jen Perelman's show, Generational Change. Steve gives us a great history lesson to help explain how taxes simply drive the need for currency. It is the circuit that keeps our economy going, but doesn't actually pay for anything. Steve also goes on to share how knowledge is a more powerful tool than any weapon could ever be. We know that corporate special interest and the influence that they wield are what prevents us from attaining the things that we need in this country. Take, for instance, the French colonizers and how they blocked Haitian slaves from learning and kept them submissive to prevent them from dreaming of anything better. Similar to slaves, we have had knowledge kept from us to be able to allow those in power to stay in power. We have been kept docile so that we don't resist or allow ourselves to dream of better because we've been told it's pie in the sky. We've been conditioned to not dare to desire more than the breadcrumbs that we are told that we deserve. So how are the conditions of the slaves in the Haitian Revolution and the sans-culottes fighting in the streets during the French Revolution similar to a single mom who has to decide whether to pay the electric bill or buy groceries next week? Each of these cases deals with the ongoing struggle of those in power versus the rest of the working class that have been exploited and kept oppressed, all to keep the profit margins of the elite growing. If you want to know more about the development of the ongoing struggle and exploitation of the working class, make sure to stay tuned for the premiere of an upcoming production called The S Word that yours truly and other members of the Real Progressives family are putting out very soon.
MMT allows us to see the economy as it is, not as people say it is. And you see the libertarians and you see the other folks out there that believe that we are constrained, that we don't have the money, that we can't do these things. And MMT shows us clearly that not only can we spend on anything that we have resources for, that we can do it as long as we have the votes, as long as we have the political power to make that happen. There's absolutely no financial constraint. There is no such thing as how you're going to pay for it, because every time the federal government spends, it literally spends with keystrokes. It literally wills that money into existence. So the idea of raising taxes to pay for things is anathema. It's not real. It doesn't have any basis in fact. So I think that's really a big thing right there to start with.
I don't know if this question has been asked or not, but it's just been kind of, itching me lately. Is there any point to federal income tax?
Yes, actually there is. So the reason for having a tax in general, you have to go way back to the beginning when kings were issuing sovereign currency, and they would have gold coins with the Caesar's face on it, render under Caesar and stuff like that. And the idea here is that the king wanted to create an aqueduct. They wanted to create a standing army. They wanted to create a road. They wanted to build something, right? A museum, whatever. And so what they would do is they would say, hey, I want to hire somebody for this gold coin. And the people would say, what do I need a gold coin for? I'm fine. I'm out here hunting in the woods. I'm, raising potatoes. I'm having fun with my family. And it's like, you got a good point there. So how about this? How about I charge you 10 of these gold coins with my face on it to keep your house? The guy's like, oh crap, how do I get those gold coins? He's like, funny you should ask that. Let me show you. I want to build an aqueduct over here and I'll give you so many of these gold coins. And so the tax is what drives the need for currency. And it's kind of the circuit that keeps our economy going. It doesn't pay for anything. So the tax either can raise the buying power of the dollar or it can diminish it. Depends on aggregate demand. And you can see that in terms of inflation. You raised the point of inflation at the beginning of this thing. And that's really the real constraint. How much inflation do you want to have in the economy? And so taxes serve as a brake or a gas pedal for the economy that drives the currency. We're in a tax-driven economy.
Right, but it doesn't go to our programs and how you don't have to balance it like that. You don't have to have it like that. That's a mythology.
That's correct. In fact, on Twitter, you and I went back and forth for a second, and I just was I put a great article out there by Raul Carrillo and Jesse Meyerson called "The Dangerous Myth of the Taxpayer Dollar." And what it is all about really is what do you think of a taxpayer, right? What do you think about that? You typically think of a white dude. You think about a dude with a suit, the good people, the mom, pa, apple pie, make America great again, all that good stuff, right? And what happens is that people don't understand the difference between states and the federal government. The state of Florida, for example, has to have tax, maybe not income taxes, but they have different taxes to fund the state-based programs. Just like if California wanted to have California healthcare, they would have to fund that literally with taxpayer dollars. But at the federal level, we don't have to pay taxpayer dollars for it. In fact, if you were to do Medicare for all for the whole nation, there's a lot of reason to believe that it would actually be deflationary, because anytime you have economic activity that is brought back into a more efficient state, you have less economic activity. So the chances of those real resources being freed up, it could really create a deflationary condition. So, it's just a matter of trying to understand the difference between states, which have to tax, and the federal government taxes, but for a totally different reason. We spend money every single time Congress authorizes spending. We create new money every single time. Not sometimes. We never recycle a dollar. A dollar is spent by the government exactly one time. It never gets respent by the government. Once it's received, it's destroyed. And so really, you could think of the dollar as a tax credit or a tax liability waiting to happen. And there's no debt to that. The deficit is largely, the reason why we say it's a myth is because it's just the difference between the amount we tax and the amount we spend. But if you recognize that the spending and the taxing are not tied together, there's no real relationship there. The tax is there to drive the currency, to manage inflation. It's kind of like an EQ on your stereo. The spending, it's really all about what do we need? What kind of an economy do we need to make our country okay? What do we need to make people be educated? What kind of investments do we need to make into the people growing up to make sure that our country is good? I look back, I've been studying the Haitian Revolution quite a bit. And one of the things that was very, very clear was they kept the slaves very, very ignorant. They blocked them from any kind of knowledge. They kept them very submissive, and they kept their head down, and they couldn't dream of anything better. Well, we have dumbed our country down right now to be like a modern day slave, where we won't resist. We don't think about the possibilities. We can't fathom anything beyond what these bad economists like Paul Krugman and others have said. So we sit there and we literally think that this is the realm of possibilities. We couldn't possibly write off all student debt. We couldn't possibly have a Green New Deal. We couldn't possibly do any of these great things that we dream of and we've read about. Futuristic things. We can absolutely do every single one of them. If you can dream it, if you can resource it, we can afford it.
The ideas of knowledge being the key to power and daring to dream for a more just and equitable society are going to be key for our next video. We see Dr. L. Randall Wray explaining why he would rather tax bad behavior instead of taxing work. Wray believes that he is one of the few progressives who want to actually eliminate the corporate and payroll taxes and replace them with the house and inheritance tax. Wray explains that the ideal tax should drive currency, but also be progressive and alter bad behavior. Ray believes that one way to do that is to tax pollution and to place a tax on family fortunes, because why should any human being be worth $190 billion while 45,000 Americans die every year as a direct result of not having access to health care? Whether you agree with him or not, Ray's outside-the-box proposals for taxing homes and wealth inheritances represent just one example of the bold and creative ideas that our society needs to truly break the oligarchic power that plagues our system.
Some taxes, as we were saying at lunch, I think are really bad. Taxing work is a really bad idea. The payroll tax, it'd be very hard to think of a worse tax. It's not progressive. Everyone pays the same rate up to the cap, and then there's no tax at all. So if you're high income, you can start celebrating, I guess if your income's high enough, in March or April, you don't pay any more payroll tax. Okay, so it's bad in that sense. It taxes work, but we want people to work. So why are you taxing them? It taxes employers who employ people. But hold it, you want them to employ people. So why are we taxing them? It favors moving jobs outside America. Why would you want to do that? It favors replacing people with robots. Why would you want to do that? So it has lots of bad effects. So that is a bad tax. Taxing corporations is a bad idea. And I'm almost the only progressive economist who thinks that raising the corporate tax would be a bad idea. Everyone else thinks it's a great idea. It's the typical progressive tax. It's a bad tax. Again, it causes corporations to move out of the United States or to try to cut special deals. Give me the tax break and I will build a factory in your community. We ought to just get rid of the tax. Level the playing field. No corporate taxes. Instead, if we wanted to, we can tax the owners. So we impute all of the all the profits to the owners of the corporation and tax them as income. Okay. The income tax is probably not a terrible tax. I think there's better taxes. Okay. So I like taxing bads. So pollution, alcohol, tobacco, maybe financial transactions, which is another popular progressive tax. Those tax bad behavior. Ideally, they eliminate the bad behavior. So the goal of a bad tax is to get rid of the behavior. So the ideal is to have no revenue at all. So you tax smoking out of existence, then there's no tobacco tax revenue at all. Okay. The ideal tax to drive a currency is a broad-based tax that cannot be avoided. That's the ideal. Taxing income won't work when you're trying to monetize an economy. The European colonizers found that out. They went down to Africa, you impose an income tax, nobody has income, they have no incentive to get an income, it doesn't work. So they said, we need to impose a tax they can't avoid, so we have a hut tax. You tax the huts. They got to live somewhere. Okay, it will drive a currency. It's very effective. So we could have a hut tax, or house tax. And you want to make it progressive, so you make it square feet. You want to make it environmentally friendly, you make it cubic feet. Because you got to heat and cool cubic feet of airspace. So I think this is an excellent tax. We should have a cubic feet of housing tax to drive the currency. And finally, you don't want to allow accumulation of family fortunes. At least I don't. Dynasties. So you have an inheritance tax with a goal of essentially wiping out the inheritance. So it should be very high.
Once we truly break our minds away from the stranglehold of an idea that our taxes go towards federal spending, we will be able to demand more than the breadcrumbs that we have been conditioned to believe that we deserve. Through the lens of MMT, we see taxing as an ethical instrument of change. It states our priorities as a society and gives us a tool to deliver them by. It lets us decide what society we want, how we will create it, and what role taxing can play in delivering that. If you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to check us out at realprogressives.org and subscribe to get notifications on new video streams in YouTube, Periscope, Facebook, and Rockfin. Y'all have a great week.